1964, the world was shaking and someone plugged in a guitar. What came out of those studios changed everything. Not just music, everything. These songs didn't just top the charts, they rewired a generation. They scared parents, they started movements. Some of them were recorded in a single take. Some of them almost never came out at all. And here's the truth most people don't know. The greatest rock songs of 1964 weren't planned. They were accidents, desperate moments, teenagers with guitars and nothing left to lose. 10 songs, 10 stories, and the real history of the year rock and roll grew up. Number 10, Dave Clark 5. Glad All Over. Glad all over, so glad you're mine. Okay, close your eyes for a second and think back to early 1964. The world was still grieving after the assassination of President Kennedy just a couple of months before. People were hurting, America felt heavy, and then this record comes crashing out of Britain, and it sounds like pure joy. Pure, stomping, uncontrollable joy. Glad All Over by the Dave Clark 5 didn't ask your permission. It just walked right into the room and started jumping up and down. Here's the context you need. The Dave Clark 5 were from Tottenham, North London, a working class neighborhood. These weren't polished pop boys. They were rough around the edges and they played loud. The song was recorded in 1963 and released in the UK in late November of that year. By January 1964, it had knocked the Beatles off the #1 spot in the UK charts. Let that sink in. They knocked the Beatles off the top even for just 1 week. That was enormous. The song was produced by Dave Clark himself, which was unusual for the time. Most bands handed that control over to a label producer. Clark kept it. That independence showed in the sound. It was raw, it was direct, and the drum beat was massive. Clark was the drummer, and he pushed that rhythm right to the front of the mix. You didn't hear that back then. Drums were supposed to sit quietly in the background. Not here. When the song crossed to America, it landed on Capitol Records and went straight into the top 10 on the Billboard Hot 100. But you know, if I stay. The Dave Clark 5 became the second British act after the Beatles to appear on The Ed Sullivan Show. That is not a small thing, that is history. Now here's your fun fact. The stomping sound that you hear on that record isn't just drumming. Clark had the whole band stamp their feet on a wooden floor during recording to build up that tribal, thundering feel. It was low-tech and brilliant. Pure instinct. So why don't we talk about this song more? Honestly, it's because history has a short memory. The Beatles were so dominant that everyone else from that British invasion era got pushed into the footnotes. The Dave Clark 5 were massive in their moment. Millions of records sold, worldwide tours. But over the decades, the narrative simplified. It became the Beatles changed everything, and everyone else became a supporting character. That's not fair to this song. That's not fair to this band. This song started 1964 with a thunderclap. And most people have forgotten. Hold on though, because the next one on our list was recorded under a completely different kind of pressure, and it almost didn't make the cut at all. Number 9, The Zombies. She's Not There.
She's not there. Well, let me tell you about the way she looks.
Summer, 1964. And this one feels different from everything else that was coming out of Britain at the time. No stomping beat, no raw guitar fuzz. This one is cool and shadowy and almost jazz-like. A minor key melody that wraps around you slowly and doesn't let go. The moment you hear that organ line, you know you're somewhere else entirely.
No one told me about her, though they all knew.
The The Zombies were five young men from St. Albans, just north of London. They won a local music competition, and the prize was a recording contract with Decca Records. That is how this song got made. A local talent contest. Think about that. Colin Blunstone's vocal is something special. Breathy, distant, almost like he's singing from the other side of a wall, and Rod Argent wrote the whole song at 19 years old. 19. Yeah, the chord changes alone would challenge musicians twice his age. The song reached number 2 in America and landed in the UK top 20. But in America, it connected deeper.
How would I know? Why should I care? Please don't bother.
Something about that cool, detached sadness translated perfectly to US audiences who were used to hearing emotion delivered differently. Here's your fun fact. Decca Records had famously rejected the Beatles just 2 years earlier in 1962. The Zombies were on Decca. The irony was not lost on anyone paying attention.
Her voice was soft and cool, her eyes were clear and bright.
This song faded because the Zombies never quite broke through the way their talent deserved. They split in 1967, right before their masterpiece album Odyssey and Oracle was released.
Eyes were clear and bright, but she's not there.
Classic tragic timing. The music business specializes in that. Next up are a song that cost almost nothing to make and ended up being absolutely priceless. Number 8, The Rolling Stones, Not Fade Away. Yes, the Stones appear twice on this list. Deal with it. Because in 1964, they were that productive. And Not Fade Away is a completely different animal from Time Is On My Side. Where that one was smooth, this one is jagged. Where that one was patient, this one is impatient and hungry and kicking the door in.
Love real, not fade away.
Not Fade Away was released in February 1964. It was the Stones' first real UK hit, climbing into the top 5, and the foundation of the whole song is built on something called a Bo Diddley beat. You might not know that name, but you know that rhythm. It's that rolling, syncopated jungle rhythm that comes from African music and blues and just loops around your brain until you can't stop moving. Bo Diddley was an American rock and roll pioneer. Want a black artist who had been making that rhythm famous since the mid-1950s and getting very little credit for it outside of the music community. When the British kids, like the Stones, heard Bo Diddley, they were obsessed. They didn't try to copy him quietly. They went at it full force, and they told anyone who would listen where it came from. Mick Jagger and Keith Richards talked about Bo Diddley in interviews constantly. That honesty mattered. The song was produced by Andrew Loog Oldham and Phil Spector, which is a wild combination when you think about it. Phil Spector was already a legend by then. Having him in the room for an early Stones session is like having Picasso watch you sketch. The energy in that studio must have been electric. Here's your fun fact. Buddy Holly originally recorded Not Fade Away in 1957. It was his song first. Boy, the Stones took it, stripped it down even further, hammered that Bo Diddley beat into it harder, and made it sound completely new. 3 artists, 1 song, 2 continents, and the DNA of rock and roll, all tangled up together. That's a music history lesson in 3 minutes. This song fades from the conversation because the Stones got so much bigger so fast that their early catalog gets rushed through. People skip straight to Satisfaction or Sympathy for the Devil, and they miss this raw, electric moment when the Stones were still figuring out how loud they were allowed to be. Coming up at number 7, a band who would answer that question about how loud you're allowed to be. And their answer was as loud as you want. Number 7, The Kinks. All Day and All of the Night. Oh man, this one. If you were a teenager in 1964 and this came out of your radio, your parents knew immediately that something had changed. Because All Day and All of the Night doesn't ask for your attention politely. It grabs you by the collar. 3 chords, that's it, 3 chords and a guitar tone so rough and distorted, it sounds like something is broken. And you know what? Something kind of was broken. And that was the whole point. The Kinks released this in October 1964, just 2 months after their explosive breakthrough, You Really Got Me. We'll get to that one. But first, let's talk about this track because it deserves its own moment. It charted at number 2 in the UK and cracked the top 10 in America, which for a song this abrasive was extraordinary. Ray Davies wrote it. Ray Davies was 20 years old and writing chord progressions and riff structures that guitar players are still studying today. The song was recorded at Pi Studios in London and produced by Shel Talmy, an American producer working in Britain who had a gift for capturing raw energy without smoothing it out. He let the Kinks sound dangerous. Most producers at the time would have cleaned it up. Talmy left the dirt in. Thank God for that. The lyrics are simple, desperate almost. A young man who wants to be around someone every minute of every day, all day, and all of the night. It's not complicated poetry, but it hits like a freight train because the music underneath it matches that obsession perfectly. Here's your fun fact. Dave Davies, Ray's younger brother, played guitar on this record at 17 years old. 17, and he was already playing with a tone that most professional guitarists couldn't match. The distorted sound came partly from how he'd physically modified his amplifier, cutting the speaker cone, jamming a needle into it to create that buzzing, angry texture. That sound was pure accident turned into genius. This song slides down the memory list because You Really Got Me always gets the spotlight. Same band, same year, same guitar tone. People group them together and then move on. But All Day and All of the Night has a darkness and an aggression that stands alone. It's not the same song. It deserves to be heard separately and respected separately. Because the song coming up at number 6 is something entirely different. Softer in some ways, but with a guitar introduction so perfect, so instantly recognizable, that even people who've never heard rock music know exactly what it is. Number 6, Roy Orbison. Oh, Pretty Woman. Mercy. Slow down for a second. Breathe. Because Roy Orbison was not like the other artists on this list. He was not British. He was not a teenager. He was not part of any invasion or movement or scene. He was a man from Texas with an extraordinary voice, dark sunglasses, and a gift for making you feel both happy and heartbroken at exactly the same moment. That is a rare talent. Almost nobody can do that. Pretty woman, yeah, yeah, yeah. Pretty woman, oh, Pretty Woman came out in August 1964, and it went to number 1 in both the United States and the United Kingdom at the same time. In a year absolutely dominated by British artists invading America, Roy Orbison, an American, came back with a song so powerful it stopped the entire conversation. Number 1 on both sides of the Atlantic. That is remarkable. Pretty woman, don't walk away. And the song was recorded at RCA Studio B in Nashville, Tennessee, produced by Bill Dees and Roy Orbison himself. The guitar riff that opens the track, that 4-second descending figure, was improvised. Orbison and his co-writer Bill Dees were working on something else entirely when Orbison just started playing it. Dees apparently said, "That's it. That's the song." Don't walk on by, pretty woman. Don't make me cry. they built everything around those few notes, the whole song tells a simple story. A man sees a beautiful woman walking down the street and for a moment believes he has no chance, and then she turns around. That's the whole story. 2 minutes and 56 seconds, but Orbison delivers it with so much emotional weight that you feel like you've watched an entire film. Here's your fun fact. In 1990, Oh, which Pretty Woman got a whole new generation when it was used in the film of the same name starring Richard Gere and Julia Roberts. Suddenly, teenagers who weren't even born in 1964 knew every word. That is the power of a perfect song. It doesn't age. It just waits for the next person to discover it. Why does it get overlooked in the rock conversation? Because Orbison never quite fit the mold. He wasn't guitar forward in the way the British invasion bands were. He was a balladeer who happened to rock. Music journalists didn't always know which shelf to put him on. But the people who loved him never needed a category. They just loved him. Now we're moving into the top 5. And I have to be honest with you, the stories get heavier from here, more complicated, more human, starting with a song that cost almost nothing to make and ended up being priceless. Number 5, The Animals' House of the Rising Sun. This is the moment we've been building toward. June 1964, number 1 in the UK and America. Eric Burdon's vocal recorded in reportedly one take. The whole thing cost £4 less than $10, and it became one of the most powerful recordings in rock history. The song itself is an old American folk song. Nobody knows who originally wrote it. It tells the story of a person destroyed by gambling and sin in New Orleans. The Animals didn't compose it, they arranged it. And that arrangement was everything. Now here's the story nobody tells cleanly. Because the song was listed as traditional, there were no songwriting royalties to split, but Alan Price, the keyboard player, was listed as the arranger on certain documentation.
It's when he's on a drum.
And that meant he received a portion of the money that came flooding in from American success. Different people have told this story differently over the years. Some say it was a paperwork decision made under time pressure. Others have suggested in interviews it was more deliberate than that. The truth likely sits somewhere in between, as it usually does with music industry disputes from that era. What is clear is that it caused real bitterness. It contributed to the breakdown of the original Animals lineup. They split in 1966, 2 years after their greatest moment. Both Burden and Price have spoken about it over the decades. The accounts don't always match. And then there's the bigger picture.
Tell your children not to do what
British artists building careers on old American musical traditions. It's a conversation the whole British invasion deserves. The Animals weren't alone in this, but House of the Rising Sun is one of the sharpest examples because the song's roots go so deep into American pain and American history. None of that changes what you hear when you press play. That guitar, that voice, that feeling of something old and true coming through a young man's chest. This song isn't just music, it is history. And it survived everything the industry tried to do to it. Number 4 was built from destruction, literally. Number 4, The Searchers. Needles and pins. January 1964, and this one sneaks up on you quietly before it takes over your entire brain. That opening guitar, jangly, chiming, ringing like a bell in a cold church. It doesn't attack you the way some of the records on this list do. It just pulls you in gently and then refuses to let you leave.
Why can't I stop and tell myself
The Searchers were from Liverpool, same city as the Beatles, which meant the world constantly compared them and constantly underestimated them. That was unfair because this band had something genuinely unique, a guitar sound that was softer and more melodic than almost anything else coming out of Britain that year. The song was written by Sonny Bono and Jack Nietzsche. Yes, that's Sonny Bono before Sonny and Cher became a household name.
But still they begin
It had been recorded by Jackie DeShannon in 1963, but the Searchers heard something in it that nobody else had found yet. They slowed it slightly, layered the guitars together, and created something that felt both ancient and completely fresh. It went to number 1 in the UK and cracked the top 20 in America. Not a massive American chart performance by the standards of this list, but the influence that followed was enormous. Here is your fun fact. Decades later, Tom Petty openly credited the Searchers' guitar sound as a primary influence on his entire career. Roger McGuinn of the Byrds said the same thing. That chiming, ringing 12-string jangle that defined so much of 1960s American folk rock, it has a direct line back to this record. The Searchers planted a seed in 1964 that bloomed across the next 30 years of music without ever getting the credit for it. That is exactly why this song sits on this list. Not because everyone remembers it, because almost nobody does, and they should. The musicians remembered it even when the public forgot. And those musicians changed everything that came after. Top 3 now. And every single one carries the kind of weight that only 1964 could produce. Number 3, The Beatles, A Hard Day's Night. All right, The Beatles. We couldn't do a list about 1964 without going deep on the most important band of the year, of the decade, of the century, some would argue. A Hard Day's Night was released in July 1964. It was the title track of their first film, and it begins with a sound that has never been fully explained. That chord, that single, ringing, crashing chord that opens the song. You've heard it, everyone has heard it. George Harrison hits it, and it hangs in the air for what feels like a full second before the rest of the band explodes in. Music theorists, guitarists, and producers have been debating its exact composition for 60 years. Fad 9 with extra notes. Some say there was a piano note inside it. George Martin, their legendary producer at EMI's Abbey Road Studios, added his own piano voicing to the mix. The full chord is layers of instruments played simultaneously, and the result is something that doesn't sound quite like anything else. The song was written by John Lennon mostly, from a phrase that Ringo Starr used after a long day of filming. Ringo said, "It's been a hard day's night," and John heard it and thought, that's a song. That's the title. He wrote it overnight because the film needed it immediately. Sometimes the best creative work happens under the most ridiculous pressure. The production by George Martin at Abbey Road was typically brilliant. Martin was a trained classical musician who understood the Beatles better than any other producer could have. He gave them space when they needed space and structure when they needed structure. On A Hard Day's Night, he let Lennon's rhythm guitar drive the whole machine and kept the arrangement tight and urgent. The film of the same name, directed by Richard Lester, changed cinema as much as the song changed music. It was raw and funny and documentary-like in its style. It showed the Beatles as real human beings rather than manufactured pop stars. That honesty connected. Here's your fun fact. John Lennon recorded his main vocal in one of the early takes, and the band kept it. By the time of recording A Hard Day's Night, the Beatles were working at such a high creative level that perfection was just their starting point. The song gets overlooked in the grand Beatles conversation because by the time you get to Revolver, Sgt. Pepper, Abbey Road, and the White Album, the early stuff can feel like prologue, but this was not prologue. This was the Beatles at full power in the moment, doing something nobody had done before, one more before number one. And this one has a story about numbers that will genuinely stop you in your tracks. Number 2, Manfred Mann. Do-wah diddy diddy. Summer 1964, and this one hits you like a burst of pure sunlight through a rain cloud. Number 1 in both the UK and America, one of the few songs that year that could sit comfortably next to anything the Beatles were doing on the charts and not look out of place. That is saying something in 1964. The song was written by Jeff Barry and Ellie Greenwich, two of the most gifted songwriters working out of the Brill Building in New York. It was actually recorded first by an American group called the Exciters in 1963, but Manfred Mann heard it and transformed it into something irresistible, cleaner, sharper, full of personality. Paul Jones on lead vocal was 22 years old and sounded like he'd been doing this his whole life, confident without being arrogant. The kind of voice that makes everything sound effortless even when it isn't. Here's your fun fact. The nonsense syllables in the title, I do-wah diddy diddy, were not throwaway words. They were doo-wop vocal filler, rooted in American rhythm and blues tradition going back decades. What sounded like playful gibberish was actually carrying an entire musical culture inside it. This gets overlooked because it sounds so joyful that people don't take it seriously as a piece of rock history, but a song that goes to number 1 on both sides of the Atlantic in the same year as the Beatles deserves serious respect. And now, number 1, a song that didn't come from Britain, didn't come from a guitar band, but hit harder than almost anything else that year.
Hey, Rocklore community. Before we continue, let's have a real talk for a second, bro. You know, this isn't just a channel to us. And I hope it's not just a place you come to watch a video and then forget about it. This is a community. It's a place where we get to dig up the secrets of rock and roll, share our favorite riffs, and celebrate the artists who maybe didn't get the love they deserved. Right now, only about 1% of our viewers are subscribed. We can change that together and grow this community. All you have to do is hit that subscribe button with the notification bell on. When you do, you're not just helping a channel grow, you're becoming a member of the Rocklore family. You're signaling to us and to YouTube that these stories matter, that this music is worth preserving, and that this community is a place you want to be. Subscribing is your way of making sure you're always in the loop. It means you'll be the first to know when we unearth a forgotten legend, drop a new countdown, or dive into a piece of rock history you've never heard before. So if you're a true fan of the lore, if you get that same feeling of discovery that I do, then come join us. It takes 1 second to be a part of something bigger.
Number 1, The Righteous Brothers. You've Lost That Lovin' Feelin. November 1964, and this one lands differently from everything else on this list. No British accent, no distorted guitar, no stomping drum beat, just 2 voices and an orchestra, and one of the most devastating opening lines ever written. Bill Medley and Bobby Hatfield recorded this at Gold Star Studios in Los Angeles, produced by Phil Spector. And Phil Spector brought everything he had. His famous wall of sound, layers of instruments, multiple guitars, strings, percussion, all recorded simultaneously in a massive, reverb-soaked room, was never more perfectly deployed than on this record. The song was written by Barry Mann, Cynthia Weil, and Phil Spector himself. Barry Mann has said they wrote it specifically for these two voices. Every line was built around what Bill Medley's low baritone and Bobby Hatfield's high tenor could do together. That kind of intentionality shows. You can hear it. When it was submitted to radio stations, the running time was listed as shorter than it actually was because program directors in 1964 thought 3.5 minutes was too long for radio play. Spector quietly listed it as shorter on the label. The DJs played it. Nobody complained. Nobody turned it off. Nobody could. Here's your fun fact. When Bobby Hatfield first heard the song in the studio, he realized that Bill Medley sang almost the entire first verse alone. He turned to Spector and asked what he was supposed to do while Bill was singing. Spector told him to go stand in the corner and make some money. That became one of the most repeated stories in rock history. And this song became the most played record in radio history for several decades running. Not the most sold, the most played. DJs kept reaching for it. Audiences kept asking for it because it does something almost nothing else does. It makes you feel the exact moment love starts to slip away, that specific ache. And once you felt it in a song, you never forget it. Don't let slip away. 1964 gave us British invasions and power chords and one-take wonders, but it also gave us this, a song so human and so honest that 60 years later, it still stops the room. That is why it sits at number 1, because rock and roll has always been about feeling something true, and nothing in 1964 made you feel it harder than this.